This will be for the con exercise, positive and negative intervals of polynomials. Now, there's an excellent article by the same name on Khan Academy, and I highly recommend you check it out. But I'll show you the main thing to take away from the article. Okay, if you recall, the zeros of a polynomial are basically the x-intercepts. So we don't have the graph of the polynomial drawn here, but these points right here are called the zeros or x-intercepts. They're called x-intercepts because that's where the polynomial crosses or intercepts the x-axis. And they're called zeros because if you were to graph a line on the x-axis, the equation for that graph would just be y equals 0. So you want to remember the sign, and what they mean by sign is basically the plus minus sign. So the plus minus sign of a polynomial between any two consecutive zeros is either always positive or always negative. So I will show you that on the graph. So consecutive zeros means two of them in a row. So if you took this 0 here and this 0 here, that would be two zeros in a row, or consecutive zeros. And notice the graph in this section is always positive. And what we mean by positive is positive y values, or above the x-axis. And same with the negative values. If you look at this 0 here and this 0 here, the two in a row, they are consecutive zeros. And notice the polynomial in this section is always negative or below the x-axis. So the negative and positive is basically based on the y values. Okay, on to the exercise. They give us the function here. They give us the function in factored form. Okay, and you could find the zeros from this, but they actually give us all of the zeros. And then they want to know what is the sign, in other words, positive or negative, plus minus sign, of f, the function f, on the interval x is bound by -7/3 and -3/5. And then the choices are always positive, always negative, or sometimes positive, sometimes negative. So the first step is to write out the zeros on a number line. All right, so I'm going to draw a number line here. And remember, on the number line, the smaller numbers are to the left and the greater numbers are to the right. Okay, you don't necessarily have to put 0 on it. We just want to put the zeros in order. All right, so the smallest one is -5. All right, let me erase this here. The smallest one is -5. I'm going to put that all the way to the left. All right, next up is -7/3. This is basically a little less than -2. So that's got to be the next one, -7/3. Okay, next up is -3/5. And finally, we have +2. All right, so notice I put the zeros in order on a number line. I didn't graph anything, just put it on a number line. And they want to know the sign between -7/3 and -5/3. So that's going to be right in this interval right here. All right, so we said before in the article, if you go in between consecutive zeros, it has to be always positive, or always negative. All right, so it's definitely not going to be sometimes one or the other. So what you want to do is take a number that's in this interval and plug it into the original function equation. All right, so -7/3, that is basically, and I would just do this in my head, negative 7/3 is basically negative 2 1/3. And this is negative 3/5. So you want to choose an easy number that's between these two. Okay, I'm going to choose -1 because it's usually easy to plug in something like that. So I'm going to plug in x equals -1. All right, you want to plug that in. We're going to plug it in to the function f and see what happens. So basically, we are evaluating f of -1, okay? And you don't have to get an exact value. You just want to find out if it is positive or negative, all right? It's definitely not going to be 0 because we're picking a number that's in between the two zeros, two consecutive zeros, so it can't be 0. So in my head, I'm plugging in x equals -1. Here it's going to be -5 plus 3, that's -2. You can write -2 or just write a negative sign. All right, -1 in here, -2, that's going to be -3, so that's negative. -1 in here, -3 plus 7, that's going to be a positive. And then -1 in here, -1 plus 5 is +4, that's going to be a positive. So negative times negative is positive, times positive is positive, times positive is positive. Okay, so overall, when you plug in when you plug in x equals -1, you're going to get a positive. So on this interval right here, between -7/3 and -3/5, the polynomial is going to be positive. It's going to be above the x-axis. So that's all it is. Okay, they said the interval between -7/3 and -3/5. So that's what we did. It's always positive. Okay, we have our function. They give us the zeros. What is the sign of f between -1/5 and +2? All right. So some of this you can do in your head. I'm just writing the number line to illustrate. Okay. But if we wrote out a number line here, of the zeros, -6 would clearly be the smallest. All right, next up would be -1/5. And finally, +2. Now, when they list the zeros on Khan Academy, I believe they list them in increasing order, but I can't guarantee that. So I'm just drawing them on the number line to show you. Okay, the interval is between -1/5 and +2. So we're looking at this interval right in here. Okay, we have two consecutive zeros. So it's either going to be always positive or always negative. Okay, it's not going to be sometimes one or the other. So pick an easy number on this interval between -1/5 and 2. I'm going to go with x equals 0. That is typically easy to plug in. So x equals 0 is what I am going to plug in to the original equation. All right, so I'm going to evaluate f of 0. That means I put in 0 in place of any x. I can do it in my head. I don't worry about the actual exact numbers, just the plus minus signs. Okay, x equals 0. This would be 5 times 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. That's a positive. X equals 0 times 4 is 0. Minus 8 is -8. That's a negative. X equals 0 plus 6 is +6. Positive times negative is negative. Times positive is still negative. So that's your answer. So the interval between -1/5 and +2, it's going to be always negative. So it's always going to be below the x-axis. Answer B. All right, one more here. They give you f of x in factored form. they list all the zeros. What is the sign of f on the interval between -2 and 9/2? All right. So here we have a lot of zeros. I have a feeling it is not going to be always positive or always negative. All right. So if I draw the number line here, and it looks like it is in increasing order. Okay, like I said, I can't guarantee it, but it looks like that's what they do. So -4 is the smallest. Next up is -2. I'm just drawing the zeros. Next up is +1. Next up is +3. And 9/2 is 4.5, so I know that's greater than 3. Okay, I'll just put the 9/2 there. And they want to know what the sign of the graph will be on the interval from -2 to 9/2. Okay, so we have a little bit of work to do here. Okay, because our interval runs all the way from -2 all the way to 9/2. Okay, so we need numbers in between consecutive zeros. Pick easy numbers. Between -2 and 1, I'm going to go with x equals 0. Between 1 and 3, I'm going to go with x equals 2. And between 3 and 9/2, I'm going to go with x equals 4. All right. So I am going to plug in these values. Now, the multiple choices are always the same, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, it's either always positive, always negative, or sometimes one or the other. So if I get like positive for one and negative for the other, I could just stop right there. I don't have to plug in the third point. All right, so let's get to work here. We're going to do 0, then 2, and if need be, we'll do 4. All right, so here's our polynomial function. Okay, let's start with f of 0. 0 minus 3 is -3. 0 plus 2 is +2. 0 plus 4 is +4. 0 minus 1 is -1. 0 minus 9 is -9. Negative, positive, that's negative, times another negative is positive, times another negative is negative. Okay, that makes sense. 3 negatives would make it negative. All right, let's try f of 2. X equals 2. 2 minus 3 is -1. 2 plus 2 is +4. 2 plus 4 is +6. 2 minus 1 is +1. And then 2 times 2 is 4, minus 9 is negative. Negative times negative is positive, and the rest are positive. So that's going to be a positive. So we don't have to do f of 4. We can clearly see sometimes it's negative and sometimes it's positive. So f of 4 is unnecessary. So that is answer C.